We're going to get started. Thanks for coming. Welcome here. My name is Jeff Wood. I'm one of the sports performance specialists up in the Performance Center. Our first session for today is called Time Management Strategies to Stay Ahead in School and Sports, Becoming a Great Student Athlete. So we have Amanda and Gretchen here today. They're academic advisors at the University of Manitoba's First Year Center. And they work with students to help develop their skills in effective studying, time management, while balancing academics with other activities, including sports. So we're just going to let them kind of take to it, and let's get going.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. So yeah, I am Gretchen. This is Amanda. And as Jeff mentioned, we're academic advisors at the U of M. We work with a lot of first-year students. A number of them are athletes. I just met actually with a soccer player earlier today. And we do a lot of workshops like these throughout the years on study skills. So one of the things that's interesting to me is you hear a lot of myths about studying, or people have their preferred ways of studying. And so what I like to do is research to see, what does the science actually show? What are the things that actually work and are the most efficient? And Amanda here.
I like to translate that into the fun stuff.
Yes.
So sometimes the things that Gretchen reads are like
Very
really
boring.
thick,
Very boring papers.
full
Yeah.
of the big words, and then I help her compress that down into pictures and fun things, or things that we can relate to. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. We think it's really exciting, really cool stuff. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to interrupt us or raise your hand, shout it out. That's perfectly fine with us. We're pretty laid back. But yeah, I guess we'll just jump right in.
Dive into it. Yeah. So we were thinking of sort of looking at these three kind of chunks today. So some tools to stay organized when it comes to time management. Some of them you may be familiar with and using already. Hopefully we'll be able to introduce you to at least one new thing throughout this presentation. We'll talk about some of the most efficient study strategies that you can use. So there may be ones that you're using that are inefficient and that take up a lot of time, that are familiar. So you might introduce some that are unfamiliar, maybe a little bit more challenging, more effortful, but are definitely worth it in the long run. And we're going to talk about some tips for tackling procrastination and managing distractions, which is something that we personally struggle with and deal with all the time.
Yeah.
And for us too, this is like a huge learning experience as well. Like all these things, we've been really enriched by them. So again, we're very open to questions, as Amanda mentioned, if there's anything you're more curious about. Oh yeah, and that's us, like learning about new things. One thing that I'll ask is, if you have a cell phone, if you could log on to this website, menti.com, and actually bring up where we have Menti set up online. Let's see. So yeah, so if you could go to menti.com, you're going to get prompted to enter a room code. So if you want to enter those digits, so 702095, and then if you can answer that first question. So
if you don't have a cell phone, that's fine too.
Yes,
so
that's okay.
It's not dire for the workshop, but there's just some cool, fun little things that we'll do with this.
Yeah, and you'll see us use this a couple times throughout this presentation. Oh, this is interesting. It's coming up as one. It's not showing us the colors. Yeah. Yeah, that's too fast.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting. We're getting like a lot of great dynamic students. Yeah.
And then the next prize
And I feel like I saw at least one U of M sweatshirt somewhere. So yeah. Never slowed up. I think that's slowed down.
Kind of
about
stopped at
30.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question. So what sports are you involved in as a student, athlete, coach, or parent? And for this one, you can like type in your answers. Yeah. So it should pop up. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I feel like there's gonna be a lot of soccer and cycling. Yeah. So archery. Cool. Yeah, I met with a couple of the players at U of M. Yeah. Sumo, that's cool. Okay, whoever's doing sumo, I want to chat with you. Oh my gosh. Well, we were so excited for a moment. Yeah. Okay, now we're seeing all of our volleyball archery. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we're getting more answers here because people can put in multiple answers. Yeah, that's very cool. Someone put cycling volleyball. I knew that. Yeah. Oh, inner tube. Inner tube volleyball. There you go. There's some. I was expecting to see it. Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. Yeah, so we'll use like this kind of minty question a little bit later as well. Yeah. Okay, but I think
so we just kind of wanted to get to know you guys, see who we're talking to today, since we're up here, but we don't actually get to talk to you too much during the presentation.
Okay. So first off, we're going to start off talking about some tools to stay organized. So we're both big fans of checklists, using calendars efficiently and using your phone in an intelligent and focused and intentional way instead of a distraction. So first, I love checklists. So this is a checklist that Amanda just did on her phone. And one of the things that often comes up when we talk with students about checklists is we'll see a lot of items like this that are like very sort of general or vague. Start English paper. But it's hard to know where to start that. What are the smaller steps? How do I know when I'm done? How do I feel accomplished and check that off? So instead, we suggest making your tasks smaller, more specific, more manageable. So now we have this more sort of, I think, like task that's easier to check off when it's done. Research and gather secondary sources for English paper for 30 minutes. When you put that time boundary around something, that suddenly makes it much more achievable. You know when you're done, as opposed to start English paper. That could take you all evening. You might not get very far. You won't know when you're done. But now you have this sort of more focused task. And, do you want to do this? Yeah, sure. Yeah, do you want to pass those around real quick? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So we'll ask you guys to just take a couple quick moments to make some checklists. We have some pens up here if people don't have pens. And so we have a couple things we'd like you to think about. What are 3 things that you want to do tomorrow, so in the immediate future? And maybe what are 3 things that you want to do next week? And the next week one is often a lot harder, but we'll sort of talk about that when it comes to procrastination as well. Yeah, just remember to make them small, specific, and manageable tasks. Yeah. Well, in a way. Maybe one day you'll be. I'm going back next year. Not a dropout. You're taking a break. I think there's 2. There might be 3 there, but you can recycle it.
that is to just kind of get you guys to start thinking about getting those things from your mind and on that paper. Because sometimes, well, I notice if I don't write something down, it just kind of escapes me. But whenever I write something down, it kind of creates a larger sense of importance for that task. We kind of trick ourselves into thinking, yes, we need to get it done. I mean, not trick ourselves, we do need to get it done, but we're more likely to follow through with that action if we're writing it down.
For me, what I like about this, about writing it down, is I think I'm a little bit different in this way. The things that I need to do, they will remain circling in my head. When I get them down, then I say, okay, I trust that future Gretchen will do that. For now, I can focus on what needs to get done. So for me, it helps me actually not be as distracted actually when I use that checklist. Yeah, but we'll sort of circle around to this. Another thing that we talk a lot about is calendars. Some people say that you should actually use calendars instead of checklists, because what's interesting with calendars is that now you have to think about how long is the task actually going to take you. You have to put those boundaries around it. And it's actually even better when you also add where you have to do that thing, because now you're making a plan to physically be at a location. You're imagining yourself doing that. And if you're doing this activity with somebody else, that adds what we call social accountability. You're connecting with somebody else who's going to be like, oh, you said you'd be at the library at 2 p.m. Where are you?
Yeah.
We really need to study for this test together. It's very easy for us to break commitments to ourselves to say, yeah, I'll study for that at this time. But when we have connected with someone else, it forms that kind of bond, right? Where it's like,
Strengthens that
I don't want to let Amanda down.
Yeah.
I like using the calendar on my phone and putting notes in it and stuff. Amanda really likes
I like physical
calendars,
so I like to actually use a pen and paper. I don't know why, it's just my preference. There's no right or wrong way. But I think as long as we use these scheduling tools, it helps us a lot. So.
And talk about phones.
Yeah, so our next tool is use our phones. They're with us all the time. I think most of us in here have a phone. So I'm an iPhone user. I don't know if most of you are or not, but I'm actually really impressed with Apple right now. I like the calendar. I also like the checklist feature on the iPhone. But we also have some other apps and stuff to help you stay organized and to keep you on track. These other two apps here, there's Tide and another one is called Forest. Those I think will help with the procrastination piece. And yeah, that sort of thing, keeping you on track. And I think we'll talk about them a little bit more later in the workshop too, and exactly how they can help.
Like the main thing is that there are tons of free tools. Oh, yes.
What's that first one?
Oh, this is Tide for focus and meditation. Yeah. So you use this one, right?
I downloaded it. I actually don't use it regularly, but it is a frequently used app that lots of people do.
Yeah. Did you have a specific question about it, or just wondering what that was?
Just wondering.
Yeah. I really like Forest, which is the one in the middle where you set a certain amount of time that you want to focus on the task, and it grows a tiny tree. If you exit that app and you check your phone, the tree will die. So it's a little bit like you have someone else or something else relying on you. And so it helps you focus during that time. It's very rewarding to use. Now let's talk about efficient study strategies. This is something we're love talking about, I think. So as Amanda mentioned, do a lot of reading and a lot of research. And I was really looking for what are the best study strategies. And by best, I mean, what are the ones that are sort of the best bang for your buck, that give you the best results for the time that you put in? What are the ones that lead to the most long-term learning, which is really the focus of a lot of the students that we meet with, because so often you're tested every 4 months, maybe every 5 months. Thinking of those final exams, a lot of content. So what's going to lead in the long term to the best results? and sort of what is going to prevent forgetting the most on sort of like a regular basis. And so the 3 ones that have come up consistently in the research over and over again, and this will be updated as people do more experiments and more tests to see if these are like still are at the top, are distributed practice, interleaving, and practice testing. And we're going to sort of go into more detail about all 3 of them. But I'll start with talking about distributed practice. So I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with like this model of studying for exams, let's say cramming, where let's say you have an exam on Friday, so you spend like Wednesday and Thursday furiously going through everything, like really long study sessions without breaks, just trying to remember everything from like the past 4 months. And you sort of like repeat that with your exams. We're all guilty of this, I think, for different reasons with different things. This is sort of our default mode to go into. But really, and I think like sort of in a common sense way, a lot of people know that actually it's better if they distribute or spread out their practice and their studying. So for example, you're studying after the bio exam too, that's okay. Maybe you have other homework to catch up on. Instead of studying in these like long chunks, you're spreading it out into smaller study sessions over the longer term. And you just repeat that and layer that. So a really common question we get is, how do you study for multiple exams that are at the same time? Will you tackle it a little bit every day, just spread out over a much longer time? This model really works well for how our brains work. We remember and forget a little bit every day, but the more that we review, the more frequently over the longer term, the more that information stays, the more it physically becomes part of your brain. So distributed practice, that's number 1, and it ties in so closely with all the time management stuff.
Yeah. I think kind of a funny thing to note with like this cramming versus distributed practice model too is sometimes you can get by with that cramming model, which kind of tricks us. And I think that's why, so Gretchen and I, as academic advisors, we're seeing like students who are in university. And one of the biggest things that we see is that transition from high school to university, where the cramming model can get you by in high school a lot of the time. But when you come to university, it's really different, and you won't be as successful there as you were in high school, just with there's a lot of different things going on that affect that. But I think that earlier you can try practicing that model of distributing your practice over time. The better it's going to be when you do, if you go on to university or college, the easier it's going to be, especially with managing your sports and athletics if you're keeping that up throughout too. So I wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, that's such a good point to bring up, because that's probably one of the most frequent things that I hear in the first term, especially around midterms and finals. So saying, but I was able to do this in high school. I was able to cram or just study a couple days before and my marks were fine. And now I'm realizing I can't do that because there's just so much more content. You're tested on a lot more of it. And it's much more independent study. So what worked in this situation, in this context in high school, doesn't work as well in university. So which is why, like hopefully we're giving you this information sooner so you can start using it and start practicing it, even just to make that transition easier later on. Let's also
next strategy, interleaving.
Yeah.
So interleaving is when you do certain subjects. So you do a little bit of biology, then you do a little bit of English in one study session and interleave. So you alternate subjects, you do different types of questions. This is how I kind of think of interleaving in the sense of like exercising. So rather than doing sit-ups for a whole hour, which would be impossible for your body, it would hurt, it would be really painful, you would be sore. But when we're exercising, we do a little bit of everything, right? So we'll do a little bit of sit-ups, we'll do some push-ups, and you'll do that cycle, which is interleaving. And that strengthens kind of everything, right? Not just focusing on one thing. You're not gassing just one area of your body, just like how your brain works when you're studying different subjects, when you're mixing in different types of questions in your study sessions. That's kind of how that works. So
Yeah, and sometimes, I have to say, it can, oh, yeah, there we go, and then,
so don't
Yeah.
do blocked practice.
don't do block practice, yeah. And I'll say that, again, like, sort of like cramming, I think block practice is kind of our default to just, we think, okay, in order to do this, I need to like focus on math for just these like 2 hours, and by the end, I'll like understand and master everything. It's kind of tricky because it kind of fools you into thinking you know something better than you do. Like if you work on the same thing for 2 hours, yeah, at the end of it, you're gonna feel like you know a lot more, you're gonna feel very competent and confident, but the real test will be when you come back the next day, 24 hours later, do you remember what you've learned? So instead of doing that like 2 hours, it'd actually be probably better for your long-term learning to do 1 hour the first day and like 1 hour the second day, to split it up like that. There's a really neat study where they tested students. They had them either study for 1 hour, 1 day before a test, or they had them study for 20 minutes, but spread out over 3 days. And the students in the second one who had it spread out, but those shorter chunks of time, they did a lot better. So this goes very nicely with distributed practice. It feels a little bit weird, I would say, absolutely.
It does,
It
yeah.
feels kind of uncomfortable, be like, but I just got this, now I have to move on to something
It doesn't
else.
feel
Yeah.
natural. Yeah, you
No.
feel like you're going to forget, but it's not the case. So I think as long as students can work through that, like those really uncomfortable feelings, and try it, you'll see great benefits.
Yeah, it'll feel slower at first probably to switch between different things, but in the long term, you're gonna actually know both of those things a lot better if you add some variety in your studying.
I think this is
We'll do sort of a little demo. This is
Yeah,
another
do we
way to
have-
think of it.
Can we have a volunteer?
Or like two That's a voluntold. Anybody else?
Anyone want to come up?
Yeah.
You don't have to talk
Yeah.
if you're
That's
scared.
another voluntold. I think it has to be like you actually volunteer yourself.
We have T-shirts for anybody that volunteers upstairs.
Ooh, very nice. Yeah, no, so-
I think, I'm not sure what size it is, but
Knock an incentive. Okay, what about 2 volunteers, a pair of friends?
Yeah. If two people want to come, but you feel braver if you're with someone else.
Okay, yeah.
All right, there you go.
Thank you. Okay, let's give them a round of applause. I will be have t-shirts in your size.
Okay, so who's the strongest? Okay, so we'll give you this one. So what we want you to do is the audience, and we want you to try and pull these books apart. So everyone look at the books, we've got the pages in between each other, and try and pull those books apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was
It wasn't great, sorry. That was supposed to happen. Okay, now you're the strongest, he said. So, now these books, we have more pages, or I guess they're interleaved a little bit more. So there's bigger chunks. There's less. So we want you to pull those apart, just like you did those ones. As hard as you can. No. You thought you were strong.
This was a trick. Okay, yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
So that's good. So this was, you guys can go.
Yeah, thank you so much for being
your shirt from the
Wow.
bathroom. So that was to demonstrate interleaving, really, how the books stick together when you're spacing it out more frequently, doing shorter sessions.
That information wants to stick.
The
It wants to
information
stay together.
sticks.
Yeah.
You can't pull the books apart. The information is.
You can't actually, this is not a trick
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah,
She's
we can pass it
actually-
around too if
Yeah,
anyone
if you
wants
wanna
to
open
play.
it.
You guys can try it and play around with it if you want.
And the most powerful strategy out of all of them is practice testing. So this is when, instead of maybe just like reading a page in your textbook, you actually answer the questions at the back of the textbook chapter. It works for a lot of reasons, but the main thing is that the more that you study, like the way that you're going to be tested on like a midterm test or an exam or a unit test, the better you're going to do on that test to basically make what you're doing every day match up with how you're going to be assessed. And is much more effective than just rereading or highlighting your notes. Again, if everyone's curious, there's a lot of research you can ask me about how ineffective and how passive those strategies are. But we love practice testing, and there's lots of different ways to do it. So we're going to do some sample practice tests with everybody. So we'll read through these, and then we'll ask sort of which question do you think would be more likely to be on a test or exam? In other words, which one would be better for practice testing? The question on the left or the question on the right? Yeah.
So the question on the left says, list 6 differences between plant cells and animal cells. And the other one says, which type of cell has a cell wall and a cell membrane? A, plant cell, or B, animal cell?
We'll give you guys a minute.
Yeah.
Oh yes, and we encourage you to talk with people around too.
You guys are allowed to talk.
Yeah.
You can make it loud in here. We'll bring you in when we want you to be quiet.
Yeah, that's so something.
Think is the best
Yeah.
question, or the question that will better prepare you for a test.
Yeah, who thinks it's the one on the left, the one that's list 6 differences between plant cells and animal cells? Just raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, seeing a couple. Or which one would be more likely to show up on a test and exam? Okay. And then which type of cell has a cell wall and a cell membrane? The one on the right. So I'm seeing more hands for that. Okay, more hands for that. Yeah. Would anyone be willing to share why they think the question on the left or the right is more likely to show up? Yeah.
Well, on the right, I just had a cell unit test on this, and that one showed up.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. What grade are you in?
Grade 8.
In grade 8. Okay. Yeah. This is really interesting.
Really interesting.
Yeah. And for anyone who said the one
That
on
makes
the
a lot of
left,
sense.
the list 6 differences. Does anyone have any idea
I
why?
think that one, because you need to know all 6 differences, or you need to know multiple differences, but maybe not.
Yeah, so I think too, this is kind of interesting because it could also have to do with at what level
you're
being
at
tested.
too.
So this one I would think of more in the earlier grades that this would show up, because it's kind of giving you some of the information already. It's really limiting your choices, and it's more about recognizing that the differences between
And that's the
animal
learning
cells.
objective in that level.
Mm-hmm. But at the higher level,
Someone saying grade 9.
someone saying grade 9 might have one that's more list the 6 differences, because now you need to know all those differences. You haven't been given any of them. You have to remember them or recall them for yourself instead of just recognizing information that's there. So this is that kind of deeper learning, more mastery of content, where you need to know more and you need to know more about the context. So this question might be coming in the future.
What is the right answer of the one on the right?
Plant cell.
It's a plant cell. So some cell walls. That's why they're rigid and square. Okay, so we'll do another question. Yeah, so similar, same thing. I guess instead of left, right, we'll go 1, 2.
Yeah.
So which one would be more likely to show up on a test or exam? What does the respiratory system do? Or how do the cardiovascular and respiratory systems work together? Yeah, so again, you can chat about this and debate it. No, there isn't. Yeah.
Okay, so should we do another vote?
Sure, yeah, so who thinks it's one? That first discussion. Oh, no one likes one.
No one likes
Okay.
one.
Who thinks it's two?
Oh, everyone knows what
Everybody
kind of
thinks it's
questions.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so again, does someone maybe from this side want to say what, like, two is the better question or more likely to show up on a test? Oh, I heard some murmuring. Someone, anybody else? Everybody knows it, no one wants to say.
I know.
Do you want to tell us about it?
Sure, I can explain. Yeah, so, being able to compare two different things that are really similar or work together, if we have a concrete understanding of that, then we can answer questions like this and questions like one. So if we're preparing that way, it's just preparing us for a larger, I guess, more broadly and thoroughly.
Yeah, for more complexity, for connections between ideas, and information likes to stick to each other. So the more you know, the easier it is to connect new information to old information that you've already learned. Yeah. And let's do one more, which has a very nice diagram. So this one, yeah, do you want to, sorry, my voice.
Yeah, so the first question, it says label the diagram and indicate one main function of each item. And then the second one is multiple choice question saying what is the main function of the nucleus. So then we have 4 different options there if you want to read through. I'll read them out loud actually. A is an organelle found in eukaryotic cells which contains DNA. B is to produce nuclear waste. C is nothing important. And D filters waste. So. It is periodic. Which is a better question, 1 or 2?
Yeah, 1. Yeah, okay, some hands up for 1. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I think this is going to be more split. And then 2? Okay, yeah, and a few hands up for 2 as well. Okay, yeah.
Should we just go right into
Yeah,
the answer?
let's answer this one, because this is going to be a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, so the answer, the right answer for this, or the best question to prepare you for a test or exam would be 1, to label the diagram and identify one main function of each item. The reason this one's better than question number 2 is question number 2 is too easy.
There's some clear filler answers.
Clear, like silly answers that would never actually be the right answer, and it's really clear. And this is actually a kind of a common thing that we see with students in university who say, I've been practice testing, but I'm still not doing it as well as I thought I would. I could go into the exam and thought I would do
much harder,
and
than
it's
I thought.
always harder.
It's always a trick question.
Yeah, or there's trick questions.
Yeah.
But usually the case is if they say they've been practice testing, they've usually probably been practicing the easy questions.
Or things that they already know really well and that they probably don't need to practice, instead of focusing on questions that they've gotten wrong or things that are very similar that they've had trouble teasing out.
Yeah.
So you have to, I think it's good, and it requires some, I think, calibration and going back and forth to try to make your practice testing as close and realistic compared to how you're actually going to be tested. Again, it's not fun. It's not fun to get things wrong or to like look really closely at what you've gotten wrong, but that's going to lead to sort of the most growth and the most learning.
Yep. It's kind of like that interleaving. It doesn't feel great sometimes when we're testing hard things, but
It's worth it.
I think so.
Yeah. And so this is sort of our kind of like quick summary from that. So practice questions should be as complex and difficult as the questions on your tests and exams. They should help you connect different concepts to deepen your learning. They should force you, ideally, to recall or retrieve information rather than just giving you information and asking you to recognize what's right or wrong. And they should really focus on small differences, the ones that are most likely to blur together on an exam. I feel like I've had this a lot when studying where it's like, oh yeah, I know this so well, and when it comes to actually being tested, like, I mixed up these two things that I both knew really well, but I didn't like make those differences clear enough. So I went with like an answer that felt very quick and instinctual, but was actually wrong. Yeah, so those really small differences.
So those are the 3 study strategies that we've researched and find are the most effective and the most efficient. Do you guys have questions about those, or questions about any other study strategies that you've heard about but we didn't talk about before we move on? No? Quiet.
It's okay, we'll hang around afterwards for questions too if anyone wants to chat about these.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about procrastination.
Yeah. Love this.
Yeah, so procrastination, it's something that every human being is plagued with. Everybody deals with it. Anyone who has anything to do has to deal with procrastination. So some of our favorite tips are using the Pomodoro technique, which I'll chat about. This is also connected to that app for us. Connecting with another human, which we've sort of chatted about already, and treating yourself with rewards, with appropriate rewards when you actually deserve them, when you've actually done the work, I think is a big thing. So we're gonna have sort of a more open conversation about this. Yeah, so I'm gonna
What
go over to the board.
is procrastination? Does anybody know what it is? Or like, what is it to you? Have you guys heard this word before? Yeah? Does anybody do it? Or are you all
Everyone should have their hand up.
I think we all do it.
Yeah.
Gretchen and I do it as well.
Yeah. So let's say, maybe let's ask a different question. So what do you find yourself doing when you're procrastinating, when you're avoiding doing something that you have to do? Oh, what was that? Was that an answer for that?
I watch TV.
TV.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or like streaming TV, like yeah.
Okay, I think Jeff, I think I heard you say anything else. That's a really good answer. Yeah.
So for anyone who's not really familiar with this word, procrastination is usually when we have something to do that's important, but for some reason we keep avoiding that task. So a lot of the time, like with schoolwork or when I was a student, I would have papers due, but I would start doing things that didn't really matter to try and avoid that. So that's what procrastination is, if anyone wasn't sure about that, what that term is.
Yeah, so knowing that, anyone else who's willing to share, what do you do when you procrastinate? Okay, well for me, what do you do?
Oh, I play video games.
I was just gonna say that actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I play video games. Yeah. Do you play like on Switch, on Steam, on
PS4.
PS4? Okay. I play on Steam. And also the Switch, because we just got Pokemon Shield, so.
Gretchen's a gamer.
No, I play video games, what's the difference? This is one that comes up a lot, which is really funny, it's cleaning. Because it feels very productive. People feel like they're doing a good thing, but they're actually using it to avoid something else that's probably more important. Yeah.
Does anyone use their sport to procrastinate, like schoolwork? Do you like practice more or?
Yeah. Trying to think of a couple of the really popular answers that we get. Oh,
social
napping.
media.
Yeah. Social media, that's a big one.
Yeah, shutting off the alarm or snooze, pushing it back.
Yeah. Snooze. Snacks, I know that's one, or it's like, oh, it's time for me to get
Yeah,
water,
going to look in
or I
the
really need to make a
fridge.
sandwich
Sometimes
right
I'll
now.
look in the fridge like 15 times in a row, over and over.
Trying to think. I really need to shop for that thing on the internet that I needed. That I didn't know I needed before until I had something else that I needed to do. Amazon. Oh, this is one that Wikipedia. I don't know if anyone emphasizes with this.
Yeah,
It's like,
searching.
now is the time
search
that I have
bar.
to look up this really obscure thing that I've
I
always
need
wondered
to know
about
the population of China
right
like,
now.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't need to before, my life was fine, but now I need to know it. So let's, what's that? Yeah, just Googling anything, those questions that come up. Yeah. Or even the things like, have you seen the, celebrities answer, most common questions about themselves that can lead you down a rabbit hole. I'm surprised no one said like YouTube yet.
Oh yeah, YouTube.
One that we did a lot. So Amanda and I were talking about college humor the other day. You could go down a rabbit hole just watching hundreds of their videos. Yeah. Okay, so those are some examples.
Those are good.
The main point is that basically, actually, it's that anything else. We would almost do rather than anything else than the things that we're avoiding. So how do we deal with that, basically? Yeah. So my favorite strategy is called the Pomodoro technique. Has anybody heard about this before? Does anybody use this? Yeah, Pomodoro. Do you like it? Do you find it helpful?
Not really. It's one of those uncomfortable things, I think, that it's hard to get into, but once you form that habit and routine, and that's the hardest thing, I think, with all of the things that we're presenting today, is just getting started with it.
Yeah, and it is
really good.
I would say your mileage may vary on that. For some people, for me personally, this works very well. I'm not sure if it would work as well for Amanda, because I don't think you structure your time in quite this way. But the basic idea is that you break up your tasks into 25 minutes when you're like focused, let's say studying, and then you take a 5-minute break. And this is sort of going back to that checklist that we had where it said like look up secondary sources for like half an hour. Like usually even things that we hate doing, we can usually manage to do them for 25 minutes. Or if you can't do it for 25 minutes, you can do it for 20 minutes or 15 minutes. Just some small amount of time to actually get you started on the thing. But 25 minutes is a really interesting amount of time because when we're procrastinating, when we're avoiding something, what we're doing is when we think about it, it sends off like a pain signal in our brain, like actually as if it's like physically hurting us. This English paper that I really do not want to write. So your brain is trying to protect you by distracting you with other things. It's like, don't think about that painful thing. Do something fun instead. Go on Amazon, look for more books. That would be my thing. Amanda's might be watching Desperate Housewives.
I've done it now.
You're done it now, so you have to move on to the next thing.
I'm trying to find a new show.
But when you say to yourself, okay, I'm just going to sit down and do this for 25 minutes, once you actually get started with the task and get into the flow of it, then your brain actually becomes distracted with doing the task itself, and that pain actually lessens, it decreases. And so it's easier to continue working. It's that beginning part that's really the hardest, and the Pomodoro helps with that a lot.
I'd like to, if you can talk about the 25 minutes of us like focusing on like how we structure it.
Yeah, so there's a really interesting study of first-year university students, and basically they tried to figure out what is the longest amount of time that like people could study or focus without needing a break, and very consistently the number that came up was 25 minutes, which is not surprisingly what used to be the length of a half-hour TV show with commercial breaks. I see some nods here, yeah, they have like TV networks and marketing advertisers know this about us, that this is the amount of time that we can pay attention without getting bored. So this fits in really nicely with that 25 minutes. And then that's usually when you need that break, when you need to move on to something else. Sometimes though, if you're like really getting into the flow, people can go for longer, like 45 minutes or an hour, you can really adapt it. But this also fits in really nicely with how we actually learn, which is yeah, you have to put in some effort for time where you're focused, but then that time when you're like on break or you're like just like walking around or distracted or like not thinking about the thing directly, there's actually still work going on in the back of your brain connecting those new ideas. So really like the break is also part of the study time and the work you're doing. It's a really necessary part of it.
Yeah, and I think we can, I don't know if you guys are ever doing like some sort of aimless task like showering and washing your hair, and then all of a sudden you get this great big idea and it's like, whoa, mind blowing. I gotta go tell someone.
Yeah.
That's kind of that like that break time where, you know, we're not really focusing on something, but these great big ideas come out. So
Yeah, whenever we get stuck working on something, when we've been like really hard at it, focusing, concentrating, we'll just go on a 15-minute walk and we'll always come back with a new idea or a fresh way to look at it. Even if we like haven't talked about what we were just working on at all, because our brains like really needed that break time to refresh, reset, and come at things from a new angle. Yeah, so it's really cool. It encompasses a lot. Yeah, so as I mentioned forest before, that's a great way to track Pomodoros. There's lots of apps for Pomodoros. There's one called Focus Keeper. You can keep repeating it. You can like sort of mess with how long you need the focus time to be, the break time to be. And I also just use a very simple web timer as well, just eggtimer.com Pomodoro. So yeah, lots of good stuff. Other people.
Yeah, so we've mentioned this briefly earlier in the workshop, but connecting with other people and having other people holding us accountable. For some reason, as human beings, we're really, I guess, motivated by other human beings. So when we can have somebody who we make a promise to, or somebody who's going to come back to us and say, hey, did you do this? We're more likely to follow through. I know I am anyway. When there's somebody else kind of attached to that, it just gives us that motivation. Because we don't want to disappoint people. As humans, we always want to impress people. We want to make people happy. So if we, you know, it kind of hurts our own feelings when we let somebody else down. So by, you know, telling someone, hey, can you check in with me after this to see if I've done that? It, I think, helps us reaching that goal and doing that thing.
And again, this is something we do very often. Sometimes just in a very practical sense, it helps you not forget what you have to do.
Yeah.
So sometimes we'll just walk into each other's office and be like, Amanda, I'm going to print this. Talk to me about it this afternoon. And she'll have them say like, oh, did you print that thing that we needed? No, I'm going to do that right now. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll get this great big idea, but at the time I can't really sit down and, you know, finesse the whole thing out, but I want to come back to it later, so I'll just run into her office and say, hey, Gretchen, blah, 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 blah. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
And then we'll deal with it later. So
yeah, it can be as simple as something as texting someone and be like, hey, I'm going to work on calculus for the next hour. Can you come text me in an hour and see if I actually did that thing, right? And you can do like this for other people as well. It can be like a mutual thing. Yeah.
we do it with our students sometimes too.
Yes, yeah, sometimes we'll say, okay, what was on your checklist for next week? Okay, we'll send you a quick email next week and just say, hey, did you do that thing that you said you would do in that place for that amount of time? And often, and we've gotten a lot of emails back by other people say like, yes, actually, I did that because I knew you were gonna ask me about it. Yeah, so it can work really well. And sort of this one, I think, again, a lot of people do already, probably. But yeah, do you want to like
The carrot and the stick.
rewards?
So setting up rewards for yourself after you've accomplished something usually a lot of the time I would do it for things I didn't want to do, right? So I'll let myself go out with my friends if I write this paper, if I study for the next hour. So you can, really anything can be a reward. The tricky thing is make sure you only reward yourself when you deserve it.
Yeah. This is something where
Kind
it
of like
can be-
training a dog. Like your dog's not doing its trick, don't give it a treat.
And this is where it can be helpful to have someone else who actually like holds your rewards hostage and only is into you like when you actually met whatever your condition is.
Yeah.
and try to make the reward, I would say, appropriate to the task, right? So that it feels worth it. Even really small rewards can be enough to motivate us. Sometimes we don't actually need to give ourselves the reward in the end. Just the thought of us can help us sort of do the next thing.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to Minty really quick.
Oh yeah, we have a
before
couple
we
more
go to
questions.
that. Yeah. So sort of talking more about procrastination. So we'll go on to the next question. Yeah, you can log back in if you're
Yeah, if you got logged out.
So we'll do another one of sort of these worlds before. So because yeah, we sort of mentioned this, but because it comes up number one, I think, from
This
people
is
are
one of
getting
the bigger
distracted.
things with our
Yeah.
students that we see. We
Yeah.
kind of thought it's probably a big distraction for you guys as well, is avoiding tasks by doing that cycle of social media, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Now there's
Now you gotta
web-
circle back because now there's new stuff. Yeah.
the video one. Yeah.
Oh,
so like,
memories. That's such a good one. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so it might be, I will only check my Instagram after I work for 25 minutes.
oh, scheduling that
Have no
stuff. Have no
friends.
friends.
That's sad and probably not good for your health overall. So scheduling your phone, turning off your phone is probably the most powerful one, but I would say the hardest.
Yeah.
I don't know many people that do that. Yeah.
I don't know if I
Yeah.
can.
Make appropriate goals. Yeah. Funnel have screen time limits.
Yeah.
There are lots of
Just throw your phone.
Again, very extreme. What if you need to call an ambulance or someone has a heart attack? I think you want to keep that. Yeah.
Yeah, screen time limit. That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
Video
Okay.
games.
Moving on to something else.
Do you deactivate account? Actually, I do know people who deactivated their accounts. That's-
Yeah. I know one person who gets his partner to change his password on all his social media accounts every week. So he can't look at them during the weekdays. He can only look on the weekends. That's when he gets the passwords. Yeah. And then he'll like come back to it. That's very extreme though.
That is very
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, sure. So let's look at the next one. What's one way to deal with the distraction of friends? And you don't need to put have no friends. Not a helpful answer. Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes, yeah, we just gotta say,
Actually,
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't an issue.
Yeah.
Tell them you smell.
I like the setting it, but that's part of doing it for good, not for people. Yeah. So there's some conversations.
That's good. Presentations too.
This was something that I talked about with a lot of my friends who were athletes in either in varsity teams or in high school. And they said that they really did have to set firm boundaries and like they realized that their teams were their friends. Like that's where they were getting a lot of their socialization. Yeah. But yeah, it's hard. You can't do everything. We did kind of an activity in some of our workshops about how to say no, because that is actually very hard for us to do unless you have a lot of practice at it and you're comfortable with yourself. But that's hard too when you have a busy schedule.
It comes
You have
back
to
to
make
that people
priorities.
pleasing thing that we always want to make people happy.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say no to people sometimes.
But I like the silencing notifications. That's probably that's what I do when I need to focus and I can't have WhatsApp messages popping up every 5 seconds. Yeah. Okay. And explaining your plans, that's part of the saying no, right? And saying these are my priorities. It doesn't mean you're not important to me, but this is just what you need to focus on at this moment. And also is what do I do with distraction of Netflix and YouTube? This is a hard. I don't even know what mine is for this. How do I deal with this? Sure. Already. Yeah. Well, The Mandalorian is on Disney Plus right now, so that's actually this is
I'm just handing out evaluations, so if you guys have some time or you want to share your feedback, we greatly appreciate you to fill them out, to give them back to us at the end of the workshop.
Oh, I like to watch videos on homework. That's what Amanda does. So instead of like watching, her thing is instead of watching like a dumb thing on YouTube, she'll watch maybe like a short inspirational TED Talk that actually makes her want to study. So still using it, but using it with better context. Yeah. Yeah. Shut her phone. Yeah. Season finale for us. So just ruin it for yourself, like in hindsight, so you'll feel quickly watch this. Okay. Okay, yeah, you can answer this sort of stopping there for now. I'm surprised that no one just put on turn off autoplay for YouTube. That's my number one way of not like getting into the YouTube rabbit hole is just turning off the autoplay. But I do like the logging out of Netflix as well. That seems to be a good solution. Okay, so we're like actually right at 7:30 already. So sorry about that. We're a little bit over time. But yeah, if you could fill out evaluations, we'll be here for the next like 15 minutes if you want to come chat with us during the break. Thanks for coming. I hope you learned at least like one new thing, one useful thing that you could start applying. Yeah, and we wish you all the best with everything that you're dealing with school and with sports. We hope you have a good rest of the evening.